It was just after 9 on a warm evening when Michelle Turner pulled her car to the curb of a quiet downtown street. She had just moved into the city 2 days earlier and was still learning her way around. The new apartment was small but comfortable, with unpacked boxes still stacked near the door. After a long day of paperwork at City Hall and a quick stop for groceries, she wanted a few minutes to breathe before heading inside. She sat in her car, the windows rolled down, soft jazz playing from the radio. It had been years since she'd had a moment to herself. She wore jeans and a plain grey t-shirt, her hair tied back in a low ponytail. There was nothing about her that stood out, at least not to anyone who didn't know who she was. To most people passing by, she looked like an ordinary woman taking a break after a long day. But Michelle wasn't ordinary. Starting next week, she would be the new chief of police for the entire city, a promotion she'd earned after 2 decades of work, sacrifice, and a reputation for leading with both strength and fairness. She was thinking about her first day, how she'd meet the department, how to build trust in a city still healing from years of tension between officers and the community, when flashing red and blue lights suddenly illuminated her rear-view mirror. Michelle frowned, glancing behind her. 2 patrol cars had pulled up close, blocking her from both sides. A voice crackled over a loudspeaker. "Ma'am, step out of the vehicle." Her first thought was confusion. She hadn't been speeding, hadn't run a light, hadn't even moved for the last 10 minutes. Still, she reached for her license and stepped out slowly, her heart steady but curious. 2 officers approached, both young, both visibly tense. The taller one, a blond man with a square jaw, spoke first. "Evening, ma'am. We got a call about a suspicious vehicle in the area. Mind telling us what you're doing parked here?" Michelle raised an eyebrow. "Suspicious? I live on this street." She nodded toward her building just a few doors down. "Is there a problem?" The officer glanced at his partner, a dark-haired man who crossed his arms. "We'll be the ones asking questions." "License and registration." She handed over her ID, watching as he glanced at the name without really reading it. "Michelle Turner," he said flatly. "Local?" "Just moved here," she replied. "From Atlanta." The second officer smirked faintly. "Atlanta?" That explains the attitude. Michelle's eyes narrowed slightly, but she kept her tone calm. "Excuse me?" He shrugged. "Just saying, folks from down south always seem to think they can talk to cops however they want." The blonde officer chuckled under his breath. "Let's see what dispatch says." He stepped back toward the patrol car, running her information. Michelle leaned against the side of her car, arms folded. She could feel the heat rising, not from anger but from the familiar sting of disrespect. She'd dealt with it before. She'd built her career on facing it, diffusing it, never letting it control her. But tonight, standing there under flashing lights on her own street, she felt the weight of irony pressing down on her. These men would soon report to her. "Mind telling me why you're really out here?" the dark-haired officer asked, still watching her closely. "I told you," Michelle said evenly. "I just parked for a minute before going inside. It's been a long day." He took a step closer, his tone sharp. "You seem a little nervous." "I'm tired," she said, keeping her voice even. "And your lights are blinding." Before she could finish, the blonde officer returned from the cruiser. "Dispatch says her ID checks out," he said. "But no proof of address." Michelle blinked. "I told you I just moved in. The lease paperwork's in my glove box." The second officer shook his head. "Do you expect us to take your word for it?" "Step back, Mom." When she didn't move fast enough, he reached out, grabbing her arm more roughly than necessary. Michelle's patience broke. "That's enough," she said firmly, pulling her arm free. His expression hardened. "Don't get smart with me." The blonde officer stepped forward. "Easy, Tom, let's not—" But Tom wasn't listening. "You think you can talk down to me?" he snapped. "You people never learn." Michelle froze. She'd heard that tone before, the kind that came from someone who wore the badge for power, not for duty. She stood still, her voice quiet but commanding. "Officer, I suggest you take your hand off me and step back," he scoffed. "Or what?" Then in one careless movement he shoved her shoulder. Not hard enough to knock her down, but enough to make his dominance clear. His partner looked startled but didn't stop him. Michelle took a breath, straightened her posture, and looked him directly in the eye. "What's your badge number?" she asked calmly. He laughed. "Why, you planning to report me?" "Yes," she said. "To myself." He frowned, confusion flashing across his face. What's that supposed to mean? Michelle reached into her back pocket and pulled out her slim leather wallet. She flipped it open slowly, revealing her badge, the gold emblem gleaming under the patrol lights. It means, she said evenly, you just laid your hands on your new commanding officer. For a second, no one moved. The sound of the city faded, the hum of cars, the buzz of a distant siren, until all that remained was silence and the officers' stunned faces. The blonde officer's mouth fell open. "Chief Turner," he whispered, Tom's expression drained of color. This is some kind of joke." Michelle took a slow step forward. "No, Officer Tom. The joke is that I expected better from the people I'm about to lead." For a long moment, the only sound came from the steady hum of the patrol car's engine and the faint buzz of the streetlight above them. Officer Tom's hand fell to his side, his posture stiff as reality began to sink in. His partner, Officer Blake, looked pale, his mouth opening as if to say something, but no words came. Both men stood frozen, as if the world had stopped mid-breath. Michelle didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her tone carried the same quiet command that had earned her respect in every department she'd ever led. "Oh, you called me suspicious," she said slowly, her voice steady. "You questioned me without cause, and you put your hands on me while I was standing in front of my own building." Tom swallowed hard. "Chief, don't," she cut in sharply. "Don't call me that right now. You didn't see a chief a few minutes ago, did you? You saw a woman who didn't fit where you thought she should." Blake stepped forward slightly, his voice small. "Ma'am, we didn't mean any disrespect. We were just responding to a call." Michelle's eyes met his. "And when the call turned out to be nothing, why did it turn into this? You had my license. You had confirmation I wasn't a threat. But you stayed because you could." Blake looked away, shame heavy in his expression. Tom still hadn't moved. His jaw flexed, his pride warring with the weight of his mistake. Michelle sighed quietly, lowering her badge. The night air felt heavier now, the stillness wrapping around them like a warning neither of them would forget. "Go back to your car," she said calmly. "Both of you." Blake nodded immediately, turning toward the cruiser. Tom hesitated. "Ma'am, please, I didn't know." "That's exactly the problem," she interrupted, her tone quiet but sharp. "You didn't know. You didn't ask. You assumed." She stepped closer, her eyes steady on his. "I don't care who someone is or what they look like. If you wear that badge, you don't get to use your assumptions as an excuse for disrespect." He nodded quickly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, ma'am." "Go," she said again. The two men retreated to their patrol car, moving carefully, as if afraid that sudden motion might break the fragile silence between them. When they drove off, the red and blue lights disappeared into the dark, leaving Michelle standing under the glow of the street lamp, the faint hum of the city returning to life around her. She stayed there for a few minutes, breathing slowly, letting the anger drain from her body before it hardened into something else. She had dealt with worse. Barriers that had taken years to climb, respect that had taken years to earn. But this moment cut differently. These men weren't strangers from another state. They were her officers now, and come Monday morning, she'd be standing in front of them as their leader. When she finally walked into her building, her hands still trembled slightly. She set her badge on the counter, leaned against the wall and closed her eyes. The humiliation she felt wasn't about the insult itself. It was about the reminder of how deep old habits ran in this profession, habits she'd sworn to confront head-on. The next morning, she arrived early at the precinct, the winter sun barely climbing over the horizon. The hallways smelled faintly of fresh paint and coffee, and her nameplate had already been mounted on the office door. Chief Michelle Turner. She stood there for a moment, staring at it, feeling the strange weight of both pride and responsibility. When she walked into the squad room, a few officers were already gathered, sipping coffee and glancing at the newcomer, without realizing who she was. She nodded politely, setting her coat down. A few minutes later, Captain Reynolds, a man in his 50s with a calm, weathered face, walked over, smiling warmly. "Chief Turner, welcome aboard. We're glad to have you." She smiled back, shaking his hand. "Glad to be here, Captain." He gestured toward the squad room. "I know we start orientation later, but I thought I'd introduce you to the patrol team now. They're the heart of this place." Her eyes flicked briefly toward the far side of the room and froze. Officers Tom and Blake were there, sitting at a table by the wall. Tom looked up mid-conversation, his expression shifting instantly from casual to stunned. Blake nearly dropped his coffee. The room went quiet, sensing tension without knowing why. Michelle's posture remained calm. She didn't flinch, didn't gloat, didn't even raise an eyebrow. She just said, "Captain, why don't we start there?" Reynolds smiled, unaware. "Of course." He turned to the two men. "Officers, this is our new chief, Michelle Turner." The silence that followed was heavy enough to hear the hum of the vending machine in the corner. Tom stood automatically, his face pale. "Chief Turner," he said, his voice stiff. "Officer Tom," she said evenly, her gaze holding his. "Good to see you again." "Officer Blake." Reynolds looked between them, sensing something. "You've already met?" "Yes," Michelle said, her tone measured. "Last night, actually, they were..." "Thorough?" Blake's throat bobbed. "Chief, about that, and not here," she said gently but firmly. "We'll talk later. Right now we have a department to run." She turned toward the rest of the room, her voice steady, professional. "Good morning, everyone. My name is Michelle Turner. I'm honored to serve as your new chief. I won't take up too much time, but you should know one thing about me right away. I believe in accountability, in the kind that starts from the top and reaches all the way down." As she spoke, her gaze passed over Tom and Blake, pausing for just a heartbeat before continuing. "We serve a community that's learned to expect more from us, and they should. Our job isn't about power. It's about protection. Respect isn't given with the badge. It's earned through every choice we make while wearing it." The room was silent. Every officer watched her, some curious, some thoughtful, a few uneasy. But by the time she finished, the tone in the room had changed. When the meeting ended, officers began to disperse quietly, whispering to one another. Tom and Blake stayed behind, waiting awkwardly by the doorway. Michelle glanced up from her papers. "Close the door," she said softly. The door clicked shut, sealing the three of them inside the small office. The blinds were half drawn, the morning sun cutting pale stripes across the desk where Michelle sat, calm but unreadable. Tom stood stiffly near the wall, hands clasped behind his back, his partner Blake shifting uneasily beside him. Neither man seemed to know where to look. Michelle took her time before speaking. She removed her glasses, set them down carefully, and folded her hands. "I've been in this job a long time," she began quietly. "I've dealt with every kind of mistake an officer can make. But what I saw last night wasn't about a bad decision. It was about a mindset." Tom opened his mouth, but she raised a hand slightly, stopping him. "Don't speak yet!" "You'll get your turn." Her tone was calm, controlled, the same voice she used in command briefings and crisis negotiations. It wasn't anger that filled the room. It was disappointment, the kind that weighed heavier than shouting ever could. "You had no reason to approach me the way you did," she continued. "No reason to escalate a situation that didn't exist. I was parked on my own street doing nothing wrong. You saw a black woman sitting in a car, and that was enough to make me suspicious in your eyes." Blake's head dropped slightly. "Chief, we really were responding to a call." I know that," Michelle said. "But responding to a call isn't the issue. How you responded is, dispatch confirmed I wasn't a threat, but you stayed, questioned, and mocked. You called me ma'am like it was a warning, not a sign of respect. And one of you," her eyes flicked to Tom, "put your hands on me." Tom swallowed hard. His voice was low. "Chief, I lost my temper. I thought you were..." "What?" she interrupted softly. "Disrespecting you. Being difficult? You thought I needed to be reminded who had the authority." He couldn't answer. Michelle leaned back in her chair, her voice still even. "You've probably worked in this department long enough to forget what the badge means. It's not armor. It's not power. It's trust. Every time you put it on, people expect you to act like the line between fear and fairness still matters." Blake's voice broke the silence. "We were wrong, Chief. I knew it the second I saw your badge." You just what?" Michelle asked. He hesitated, then sighed. "We got used to people being problems before they even opened their mouths." She nodded slightly. "Then that's what's going to change. Starting today." Tom finally looked up. "Chief, are we being suspended?" Michelle studied him for a long moment. "If I suspend you, you'll learn nothing except how to be angry about consequences. You'll talk about how unfair it was. You'll tell yourselves I embarrassed you in front of the department." She paused, her eyes narrowing slightly. "No, you're not suspended. You're reassigned. Both men exchanged a quick glance. Reassigned? Blake asked carefully. You're joining the Community Outreach Division, she said. Effective immediately. You'll spend the next 6 months working directly with neighborhoods you've probably only driven through. You'll help run after-school programs, food drives, safety seminars, anything that forces you to see people as people again. You'll write weekly reports, attend bias and conduct sessions, and when I feel you understand what this badge really stands for, we'll talk about returning to active patrol. Blake nodded quickly. Yes, ma'am. We understand, Tom hesitated. Chief, I thank you, I mean it. You could have fired me, she met his eyes. You're right. I could have, and I might still if I don't see change. He nodded slowly, guilt tightening his shoulders. You'll see it. Michelle stood, signaling the conversation was over. Then start earning that promise. Dismissed. The two officers left quietly, the door closing behind them with a soft click. For a few seconds, Michelle just stood there, staring at the empty space they'd left. The anger she'd felt the night before had dulled into something else now. Resolve. She sat back down, rubbing her temples for a moment, before glancing at the small photo frame on her desk. It was her father, standing beside her in uniform on the day she graduated from the academy. He'd been one of the few black officers in their district back then, and she remembered his words that morning. They'll test you, baby girl. They'll test your patience, your pride, your kindness. Don't ever let them make you forget who you are. She smiled faintly. Still trying, Dad, she murmured under her breath. The rest of the day passed in quiet motion. Officers came and went, paperwork piled high, the buzz of conversation filling the halls. Word of what happened that morning spread quickly. No details. Just whispers that the new chief wasn't someone to underestimate. That evening, as the sun dipped low behind the station, Michelle stood by her office window, watching the orange light fade into the horizon. She thought about Tom and Blake, about how easily arrogance and routine could twist good officers into something smaller than they once dreamed of being. But she also believed people could change if they were given the right reason. She turned off the lights and gathered her things. The hallway was empty now, her footsteps echoing softly as she walked toward the exit. Outside, the city buzzed faintly with the rhythm of traffic and street chatter. She pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders and breathed in the cool night air. As she unlocked her car, she caught her reflection in the window. The same face that had been doubted, dismissed and tested 100 times before. But now that same face looked back with quiet certainty. She wasn't here to fit in. She was here to rebuild what the uniform had lost. The next morning began quietly, the kind of calm that came before a department learned something new about itself. Michelle arrived early again, as she always did, walking through the corridors of the precinct before most of the officers clocked in. The coffee machine sputtered in the break room, paperwork waited in neat piles on her desk, and outside her window, the city was slowly waking. It had been only 2 days since that tense night, but something already felt different inside those walls, an awareness, subtle but present. By the time the morning briefing started, more officers than usual had gathered in the main room. Michelle didn't call the meeting, they had. She stepped in quietly, listening from the back as Captain Reynolds began. "We've had a reminder this week," he said, his voice steady, "about who we serve and how we're supposed to serve them. I think everyone here knows what I'm talking about." Heads nodded across the room. Some eyes flicked toward Michelle, who gave no sign of acknowledgement. She simply crossed her arms and watched. Reynolds continued, "We've got a new chief now and she expects the best from every one of us. Let's not make her expectations higher than our behavior." Michelle finally stepped forward. "Thank you, Captain," she said, her voice cutting through the room with calm authority. "I appreciate that. But let me add something." She looked at the rows of uniforms, men and women of all ages, some hardened by years of service, others still carrying the nervous energy of their first badge. "I know most of you didn't join this department for power. You joined because you wanted to protect, to help, to make a difference. Somewhere along the way, some of us lose sight of that. We forget that wearing this uniform doesn't put us above anyone. It puts us in service to everyone." The room stayed silent, her words steady and unhurried. "We can talk about training, policies, or new programs all day, but none of it matters if you don't treat people with respect. You can't demand trust from a community you won't look in the eye, She paused, letting the words sink in. So I won't tolerate prejudice, aggression, or arrogance. Not from my officers. Not in my city. If you can't handle that, turn in your badge now and we'll wish you well. But if you can, if you're willing to lead by example, then we'll rebuild this department into something this city can believe in again. When she finished, there was no applause, no murmur of chatter, just quiet understanding. The kind that didn't need noise to show respect. Later that afternoon, as she reviewed reports in her office, a soft knock came at the door. She looked up to see Tom and Blake standing there again. Both men looked different, less guarded, more thoughtful. "Chief," Tom said quietly, "we're heading to our first community shift today." "I just wanted to thank you for not firing us," Michelle set her pen down. "You don't need to thank me, officer. Thank the people you're about to meet. They're giving you another chance to prove why you wear that badge." He nodded, visibly humbled. "We will," Blake added. "We were wrong, Chief. I think that night might have been the best lesson we could have gotten. It's not easy to admit, but I'm glad it happened with you." Michelle's tone softened. "Change isn't supposed to be easy, but if you mean what you just said, make sure your actions show it. Every shift, every stop, every conversation." They nodded again and left quietly, leaving the door slightly ajar. When the day ended, Michelle sat for a long moment in her chair, staring at the framed photo of her father again. She could almost hear his voice, steady, proud, amused. "Keep your head high, baby girl. You're not here to fight them. You're here to guide them." The sun had started to dip, streaking gold light across her office. She turned off her computer, gathered her things and walked outside. The streets were calm, the city bathed in the soft amber of early evening. As she passed the patrol lot, she saw Tom and Blake loading supplies into a community van with a group of younger officers. They were laughing with a few neighborhood kids who'd wandered over to help. The image made her stop for just a moment. It was small, but it was something. She walked toward her car, her heels tapping lightly on the pavement, her breath visible in the cool air. The world wasn't perfect. Change would be slow, sometimes frustrating, sometimes painful. But standing under that fading sky, Michelle knew one thing for certain. She hadn't taken this job to be liked. She'd taken it to make things right. As she drove home, the city lights flickered to life street by street. She rolled down the window slightly, feeling the evening wind brush her face, and allowed herself a small, tired smile. She'd faced disrespect, defiance, even danger, but she'd done it her way. With calm, with strength, and with dignity intact, the badge on her chest didn't define her. The way she carried it did. And as long as she wore it, no one under her command would forget what it truly meant to serve.